Hey guys, tonight, we drift back, far back, to a world that feels both familiar and frightening. A world of marble temples, crowded markets, and streets that never fully slept. A world that built aqueducts strong enough to last 2,000 years, yet also invented punishments so strange, so dramatic, and sometimes so ridiculous, that you may wonder how the same people pulled off both feats. Welcome to ancient Rome. A place where the law ruled everything. And I mean everything. Who you could marry. How you dressed. What you sold. How you prayed. What you owed. What you owned. What you did. And yes, what happened when you messed up. Rome did not play around. But tonight, we're not here for the battles or emperors or fancy politics. We're here for something quieter and darker. The part of Rome that lived just under the surface. The part people whispered about. The part that made every citizen walk a little straighter. Because Rome wasn't only a civilization of power. It was a civilization of fear. And fear, in Rome, had many forms. Let's set the mood. Imagine the soft glow of oil lamps along a stone street. The distant rumble of a cart. The murmur of late-night conversations. Rome, in its quieter hours, almost feels peaceful. Almost. But even when calm, there's always that sense of pressure, like the city is watching you. And maybe, it actually was. See, Romans believed the strength of their whole world depended on obedience. On rules. On the idea that everyone had a place and stayed in it. From the emperor all the way down to the guy who cleaned the public baths. Order wasn't just a nice idea, it was survival. If people broke that order, cracked the obedience, or acted out of line, they believed disaster could follow. So to keep this great machine running, Rome developed a justice system like no other. Logical at times. Fair on good days. And on other days, well, let's just say it got creative. Very creative. Tonight we open the story of Rome's bizarre punishments, not to shock you awake, but to uncover how a mighty civilization used fear, ritual, and performance to stay in control. Because Roman punishments were never only about crime. They were about sending a message. And trust me, the Romans loved sending messages. They built huge arenas, public squares, and courts not just to judge people, but to show everyone else what happened when you crossed the line. A trial wasn't just justice. It was a show. A bit of theater mixed with law. And the punishment at the end? That was the grand finale. The part everyone remembered. Now, before your imagination runs too wild, let me remind you, not every punishment was deadly. Some were symbolic. Some were meant to shame. Some were basically the ancient version of, go sit in the corner and think about what you've done. But others were brutal enough that even people in Rome said, okay, maybe that's a little too much. Still, Rome believed these acts kept society stable. The pain of one protected the many. At least, that was the idea. And because of this belief, punishment became something almost sacred. It blended the legal world with the religious one. Romans often saw crime as more than a human problem, sometimes it was an insult to the gods. And if the gods got annoyed, well, everyone was in trouble. So punishment wasn't just justice. It was a way to keep the heavens calm, the omens good, and the city protected. This is where Roman thinking gets interesting, and a bit eerie. A punishment could be shaped like a ritual. Full of symbols, traditions, meanings only Romans understood. Some punishments were tied to myths. Some were based on old beliefs about purity or bad luck. Some were designed to scare off evil spirits. And then some were simply made to scare off your neighbors. But all of them had one thing in common. They were meant to be remembered. So as we walk through this chapter, let's take a moment to understand how Rome became a society where public fear and public order worked hand in hand. The Romans were proud of their laws. The 12 tables, their earliest written legal code, were displayed in the center of the city for everyone to see. They loved the idea of structure. They loved the sense of control. They believed a good citizen followed rules, respected power, and behaved properly. If you didn't, they had methods to fix that. And honestly, those methods were often dramatic enough to make even modern reality TV seem quiet. But this is what makes Rome such an intriguing place for a bedtime story. Because while the city was full of beauty and brilliance, libraries, philosophers, poets, architects, it also had this darker side twisting through its history. A side that reveals the anxieties, superstitions, and political games of its leaders. Why did a city so advanced rely on punishments so extreme? Why did emperors, politicians, and judges turn justice into a spectacle? Why did the people keep watching? The answers tell us something deep about human nature. About fear. About power. About how far societies will go to protect themselves, or at least to look like they're protecting themselves. So what you'll hear in the chapters to come isn't just a list of shocking punishments. It's a journey into the mind of an ancient world. A world where justice wasn't gentle. Where punishment wasn't private. And where everyone knew, one mistake could become a public event. Before we go deeper, let's also admit something: Romans had a flair for the dramatic. They liked big gestures, bold statements, and punishments that were memorable. If they were around today, they would probably run the biggest theater industry on earth. Thankfully, they are not around today, because their show ideas were, well, let's just say not family-friendly. But our goal here isn't to mock them. Or fear them. It's to understand the strange balance between order and terror that kept Rome standing for centuries. So settle in. Let the lamps grow dim. Let the city of Rome rise in your imagination, the stone arches, the crowded alleys, the distant cries from the Forum. Feel the quiet breath of a civilization that believed rules were sacred and punishment was an art form. Tonight, we start with the idea at the heart of Roman justice. Punishment was not just about the guilty. It was a message to everyone else. A message carved into stone, shouted in arenas, whispered in dark streets. A message that said, "This city survives because you obey." In the next chapters, we step into the world of that message. The world of cruelty, symbolism, ritual, superstition. And the most unusual punishments ever born from a mighty empire. For now, breathe slow. Let the ancient city settle around you. And when you're ready, we'll walk deeper into the shadows of Rome. Tonight we drift a little deeper into the Roman mind. Not the part that built aqueducts or argued in marble halls, but the part that decided what happened when someone broke the rules. And trust me, Roman thinking on this subject was not simple. It was sharp, symbolic, and sometimes surprisingly spiritual. Let's start with a single word. A word every Roman knew well: pena. To us, punishment sounds like pain, or maybe justice. But to Romans, pena meant something bigger. It meant repayment. It meant balance. It meant cleansing. Think of it like the universe had a scoreboard, and if you messed up, someone had to fix the score. And that someone was usually, well, you. Romans believed that when a person committed a crime, the world became a little dirty. A little unbalanced. Like a cup knocked off center on a table. Pena was the hand that straightened it again. It was not only about hurting the guilty. It was about restoring order, almost like washing away a stain. This is the first clue to understanding why Roman punishments were so dramatic. They weren't just punishments. They were rituals. Acts meant to clean the city, calm the gods, and reassure the crowd that everything was fine again. A very violent kind of cleaning, yes. But cleaning all the same. Now, another key part of Roman thinking was this: punishment had to be public. If you punished someone alone in a room, who would learn from it? Who would fear it? Who would whisper about it later in the bathhouse? Romans wanted everyone watching. A punishment hidden from the crowd was almost pointless. To them, justice worked best when seen by as many eyes as possible. A Roman judge wouldn't say this out loud, but the mindset was simple. If one person does wrong, everyone gets a show. Public punishments reminded the city what could happen. They kept order through fear, yes, but also through clarity. Even the poorest farmer from outside the city walls understood the message when he saw someone marched into the forum: do not test the law. Rome believed that watching someone else suffer could keep hundreds of others in line. A bit harsh, maybe. But that's the Roman way: dramatic, practical, and a little bit theatrical. But here's where things get even more complicated. Rome wasn't one big group. It was layers on layers of social classes. And each class had its own set of punishments. Your suffering depended on who you were. Kind of like checking the menu, except the menu decides the price of your misery. Let's break it down. Citizens, Roman citizens, had the most protection. They could appeal to higher officials. They could not be tortured, well, except in certain cases when the state felt like bending the rules. They usually received punishments meant to be quick, clean, and not too humiliating. The idea was, a citizen has dignity, even when in trouble. Slaves, however, had none of that protection. Slaves were considered property. Which meant punishments for them could be incredibly brutal and very public. Flogging, branding, torture, these were common. It wasn't only about the slave. It was about warning every other slave watching. Rome used fear like a tool, and slaves experienced the worst of it. Soldiers had their own system. The army believed discipline kept everything alive. If you broke military rules, the punishments could be worse than anything in the civilian world. A Roman soldier could survive battles but be terrified of his commander. Rome needed its army steady and obedient, so the punishments were built to break rebellion before it began. They punished soldiers not only to fix a crime but to protect the empire itself. Foreigners sat at the bottom of the list. They had fewer rights and often no voice in court. If Rome needed an example, a foreigner could easily become it. Their punishments were designed to remind them, and everyone else, that Rome was in charge. So yes, Rome believed in justice. But it was justice with categories. A system where your experience of pain depended on your birth, your citizenship, your wealth, and sometimes even your job. To the Romans, this wasn't unfair, it was natural. The world had order. Everyone had a place. And punishment kept that order steady. Now let's talk about something darker: punishments worse than death. This might sound dramatic, but Romans truly believed some fates were more terrifying than dying. Death could be quick, clean, peaceful, easy, even. But dishonor? Humiliation? Long, painful suffering? That was something else entirely. Rome designed punishments that carried symbolic meaning. Punishments meant to erase a person's name, destroy their reputation, or make them a warning for centuries. Some punishments were so complex, so filled with ritual and symbolism, that they became legend. The point was not to kill the body, but to crush the identity. To Romans, death was not always the final price. Sometimes the worst punishment was living long enough to feel every moment of fear. And that brings us to the most interesting part of this whole chapter. Why the Romans built their punishments this way. It wasn't random. It wasn't pure cruelty. It came from centuries of shifting governments, kings, republics, dictatorships, emperors, each adding new ideas, new rituals, new rules. As Rome grew, its fears grew too. Fear of rebellion. Fear of chaos. Fear of the gods. Fear of losing control. Every era invented its own punishments, shaped by its own problems. A king wanted obedience, so he used symbolic rituals. The republic feared corruption, so it used public shame. The empire feared rebellion, so it created punishments meant to crush entire groups at once. Slowly, across generations, these ideas blended into the strange and sometimes shocking system we now study. A system built not only on logic, but on superstition. Not only on law, but on performance. And not only on fear, but on the belief that suffering could restore balance to the world. Tonight's chapter is the doorway into understanding all the unusual punishments that come later. Because to understand Rome's methods, you must first understand Rome's mindset. For the Romans, punishment was not simply about the guilty. It was about the city, the gods, the social order, the story they told themselves about who they were. So as this chapter closes, imagine the layers of Roman society standing together in the forum. Citizens in white togas. Soldiers in armor. Slaves waiting silently. Foreigners watching from the edges. And above them all, the powerful idea of pena, punishment as repayment and purification, hanging in the air. This is the world that shaped every strange, cruel, and unforgettable punishment we will explore next. And now, we move forward in time. Into new rulers. New fears. New rituals. Into a Rome that kept reinventing its own justice. Into the punishments that grew stranger, darker, and more symbolic with each passing century. Tonight we drift even farther back, to a Rome before marble temples, before huge arenas, before the roar of the Colosseum. In this older world, punishments were not grand shows. They were close. Personal. Direct. Sometimes done right in front of a small crowd or even a family. Imagine a justice system with almost no stage, no applause, and no stone stadium, just people, fear, and a very firm idea of order. In this early era, Rome still carried the rough habits of a small settlement trying to survive. Laws were not yet polished. Punishments came from tradition, emotion, and sometimes just the mood of the ruler. And the rulers, especially one famous king, were not exactly calm philosophers. Let's begin with Tarquinius Superbus, also called Tarquin the Proud. He was the final king of Rome, and his name gives you a pretty good hint of his personality. A man with a crown, a short temper, and a talent for cruelty. If Tarquin had a catchphrase, it would probably be, "Do as I say, or else." He ruled with fear. Not polite fear. Heavy, "I hope he doesn't notice me today," fear. Many early punishments were shaped by him and other royal figures of the time. When we hear stories of his era, we see a world where justice was less about law and more about force. And this brings us to some of the earliest punishments that Romans used. The first one is simple, direct, and painful. Flogging with rods, known as vergae. Now, rods may sound small and harmless, but these were not thin twigs from someone's garden. They were bundles of strong sticks carried by lictors, the official bodyguards of Roman leaders. When someone broke the rules, these rods came out quickly. It was a fast punishment, meant to sting, bruise, and humble a person right there in public. Flogging was not about long suffering. It was about sending a message. You crossed the line. Remember how this feels. It was also very symbolic. The bundle of rods represented authority. Every strike reminded people who held power. Even centuries later, the rod bundle remained a symbol of Roman rule. But flogging was just the beginning. Some early punishments were even more physical. Consider being bound to a stake and beaten, a punishment called ad palama liguri. The name is pretty straightforward, exactly what it sounds like. A wooden stake, ropes, and a beating that no one forgot. The person was tied up, unable to move, and beaten again and again until the sentence was done. This wasn't only about pain. It was about shame. Everyone passing by could see the person tied up, It turned punishment into a harsh lesson for the whole community. Rome wanted people to understand, when you break order, your body becomes part of the message. In this early age, punishments were not just legal tools. They were emotional tools. Community tools. Rome wanted its people to fear the consequences, even when no judge was around. But if flogging and beating sound intense, the next punishment was far more dramatic, almost mythic. Imagine standing on a high cliff of solid stone. The wind pushes against your face. Below you is a steep drop straight into rocky ground. In early Rome, this cliff had a name whispered with dread. The Tarpeian Rock. This was where traitors were executed. No sword. No rope. Just gravity doing the final work. The symbolism here was strong. The rock stood next to the Capitoline Hill, one of Rome's sacred centers. Throwing someone from this height wasn't just killing them. It was declaring that they had fallen from Rome's trust. They had betrayed the city. They were no longer worthy of standing on the same ground as loyal Romans. It wasn't only punishment. It was a statement. A loud, dramatic, terrifying statement. And honestly, it worked. Few things get a message across like a giant cliff. The Tarpeian Rock became famous. Even centuries later, Romans still used the phrase, Tarpeian Rock, when talking about betrayal. It became part of their language and their imagination. Early Rome understood symbolism very well. And nothing said, "Don't betray us," quite like being thrown off a cliff. But Rome's early punishments weren't shaped only by rulers and dramatic moments. They were also shaped by something softer, but just as powerful, superstition. This was a world full of omens. Every bird that flew overhead, every strange sound at night, every sudden storm, Romans believed all these things carried messages from the gods. So naturally, punishments also came with rules based on signs and rituals. For example, certain punishments couldn't happen on unlucky days. Some rituals had to be done before the punishment began. If a strange omen appeared, the whole process might be halted. If a priest said the gods were angry, everything changed. Imagine being told, "We'll punish you today, unless the chickens say it's a bad idea." Yes, sacred chickens were a thing. We will get there later. Superstition shaped early justice in quiet but powerful ways. Romans believed the gods watched everything, including punishments. If you punished someone the wrong way, the gods might punish the whole city. So the early Romans didn't just ask, what crime was committed? They also asked, what do the gods want us to do about it? It's a strange mix, cruelty paired with caution, violence paired with ritual. But that was early Rome, a society still finding its identity, still trying to balance fear, power, and divine signs. As we look back on these primitive punishments, floggings, stake beatings, cliff executions, we begin to see how different Rome was before it grew into a mighty empire. Justice was not yet a show. It was raw. Personal. Sometimes disorganized. Sometimes emotional. Always symbolic. Before the Colosseum turned punishment into entertainment, early Rome delivered justice the old-fashioned way, with simple tools, strong arms, and heavy fear. But these early practices built the foundation for everything that came later. The rituals, the symbols, the belief that punishment must send a message, all of that began here. The early republic taught Rome that power must be seen to be believed. And that belief shaped the punishments of every later century. Now, as our chapter closes, imagine this old Rome, dirt roads, small gatherings, punishments carried out in quiet corners or sacred hills. A world where justice was close enough to touch. And from here, Rome will only grow bigger, louder, and more theatrical. Punishments will evolve. Judges will change. Emperors will add their own ideas. Many of them terrifying. But it all started here, in this rough early age. When you're ready, we move forward to the next stage of Rome's darkness. Tonight we step into a darker corner of Rome. A place most citizens pretended not to see, even though it powered their homes, their farms, their businesses, and their entire way of life. This is the world of Roman slavery, a world where millions of people lived with no rights, no safety, and no guarantee of tomorrow. Rome liked to talk about law and honor and dignity. But none of those things applied to slaves. For them, Rome could be cruel, cold, and painfully creative. Let's start with a simple truth: slaves were property. Not people in the eyes of the law. Property. Like furniture that could walk. Because of this, slave owners had the legal right to punish however they wanted. No judge. No court. No appeal. If the owner said you were guilty, that was the end of the story. Owners could beat, starve, sell, or even kill a slave without needing permission. The state only interfered in very rare cases, usually when it hurt the owner's taxes. This power shaped the entire atmosphere of slavery. Punishments weren't just about correcting mistakes. They were about showing dominance. About reminding everyone in the room who held control. And this brings us to some of the punishments no Roman citizen wanted to be near. One of the harshest and most humiliating was branding on the forehead. Runaway slaves, called fugitivi, were often caught and burned with hot iron. The mark was simple, FVG, short for fugitive. Imagine walking through the marketplace with letters burned into your skin forever. You couldn't hide it. You couldn't pretend you were free. Everyone who saw you knew your past and your status. Branding wasn't just punishment. It was a label for life. Some owners preferred other symbols, but FVG was the most common. It told everyone around you, this person tried to escape once. Don't trust them. Don't help them. The brand created fear, shame, and a constant reminder of failed hope. And then there was the punishment that stole energy instead of flesh, the mill. Picture a heavy grinding stone, the kind used to crush grain into flour. It needed to turn constantly. Sometimes animals pulled it. But in less fortunate houses, the job went to slaves. The mill punishment forced slaves to walk in circles for hours and hours, pushing the heavy stone until their legs shook and their backs screamed. Some did it all day as regular work. Others were sent there as punishment, knowing they would walk until they could barely stand. Walking the mill could break the body slowly. It drained strength, hope, and dignity all at once. It wasn't dramatic like public beatings. It was quiet torture. Endless, repetitive, and impossible to escape. Citizens rarely saw these punishments. They did not walk into the storage rooms or kitchens or mills where slaves worked. They preferred to keep the system far away from their clean marble floors. But they knew it existed. Everyone in Rome knew. They simply lived with it because the whole economy depended on it. Yet even these punishments pale in comparison to the most infamous one of all. Crucifixion. Today we think of crucifixion as a universal symbol of suffering. But originally, in Rome, it was designed specifically for slaves, rebels, and the lowest classes. Citizens were protected from it by law. Important people were never nailed to a cross. Crucifixion was reserved for those considered less than human. It was slow, painful, and humiliating. Victims were often beaten first, then tied or nailed to a wooden cross, left to hang until dehydration, exhaustion, or heart failure ended their lives. It could take hours. Sometimes days. The suffering was the point. The cross stood in public places so everyone would see it. Travelers, merchants, neighbors, children, everyone had to pass by and take in the warning. Rome never hid its harshest punishments. Especially not this one. And yet, crucifixion wasn't just about pain. It sent a message. This person is outside the protection of society. This is what happens when the lowest try to rise. Which brings us to something Rome feared more than anything: slave revolts. Slaves made up a massive part of the population. In some regions of Italy, they were nearly half. And when you have that many oppressed people living together, dreaming of freedom, rebellions can begin with just one spark. The greatest spark was Spartacus. The Spartacus Revolt, also called the Third Servile War, terrified Rome like nothing else. A group of slaves escaping from a gladiator school turned into a huge army. They defeated Roman forces again and again. For 2 years, Rome shook with fear that its own enslaved population might overthrow it. And when the revolt was finally crushed, the punishment skyrocketed. To send a message that would last for generations, Rome crucified 6,000 captured slaves along the Appian Way. The long road stretching into the city. 6,000 crosses. A line of death so long it seemed endless. Imagine walking that road. Step after step, cross after cross. Each body a warning. Rome wanted the world to understand: never try this again. After Spartacus, slave punishments became even harsher. Owners became stricter. The state cracked down harder. Fear ran in both directions: slaves feared their masters, and masters feared rebellion. It created an atmosphere of tension that lasted for centuries. But why didn't citizens want to see these punishments? Because they forced people to face the truth: Roman life depended on cruelty. The comfort of a Roman home came from the pain of others. The wealth of the elite came from the labor of the enslaved. Citizens preferred to keep that reality somewhere in the background, far from their public celebrations and polite conversations. Still, the punishments shaped Rome. They kept the system running. They kept fear alive. They showed slaves the cost of disobedience and showed citizens the price of control. As we leave this chapter, imagine the hidden corners of Rome: the workrooms, the mills, the dark cellars where punishments happened. Imagine the smell of hot iron during a branding. The heavy groan of the grinding stone. The long shadow of a cross at sunset. This was a world that lived under the shining surface of the empire. A world no citizen wanted to see. But one Rome could not survive without. When you're ready, we step into the next chapter and watch Rome's punishments become even more symbolic, dramatic, and unforgettable. Picture this: you're living in ancient Rome, minding your business, going to the baths, stressing about taxes, hoping your sandals survive one more walk. And then you hear the city gossip. They're doing a pinna cullii today. Everyone suddenly has the same reaction: wide eyes, raised brows, and a quick step backward. Because this wasn't just any punishment. This was the nightmare special. Rome's most dramatic, symbolic, and brutally theatrical way to say, "You really should not have killed your parents." Yep. The pinna cullii was reserved only for parricide, the killing of a parent or close family member. Romans saw this act as so disgusting, so unnatural, that a simple execution didn't feel enough. No, they wanted a performance. A loud message. A moral warning so big that no one would even think about harming dear old mom or dad. So let's break it down step by step. And trust me, the steps are something. Step 1, the ritual setup. Before the unlucky person even saw the sack, there was a whole ceremony. Romans were big on rituals: nothing happened without a little theater. The condemned person was first beaten with rods while wearing wooden shoes. Why wooden shoes? Honestly, because Rome loved symbolism, and maybe because it made the whole process feel extra awkward. The idea was that someone who attacked their own parent had already stepped outside normal human rules, so the punishment had to push them even further outside the world of the living. They wanted the criminal to feel like they no longer belonged anywhere: not the city, not society, not even the ground. After the beating, the executioners brought out the main attraction: a giant leather sack. Rough, dark, and strong enough to hold, well, several angry animals. And yes, we're getting to the animals. Step 2, the animals enter the chat. This is where things go from horrific to, this sounds like someone made it up after drinking too much wine. But ancient Rome was absolutely serious about this. The traditional sack included 4 animals. A dog. A rooster. A monkey. And a snake. Imagine standing there as the condemned person and watching all 4 being dragged toward you. At that point, you might stop worrying about the beating and start worrying about the angry monkey. But here's the thing, these animals weren't random. They all meant something in Roman symbolism. The dog, symbol of loyalty broken. Dogs in Rome meant loyalty and watchfulness. Putting a dog into the sack said, you broke the bond that even animals respect. The dog represented everything the criminal failed at, being faithful, being protective, being a decent human. Also, dogs are loud, strong, and definitely not happy about being tied up next to strangers. Perfect for chaos. The rooster, the daylight witness. The rooster symbolized time, sunrise, and constant vigilance. Romans believed the rooster announced the start of every new day, and by putting it into the sack, they were basically saying, even the new day doesn't want you. Plus, the rooster would spend the whole ordeal flapping, pecking, and screaming. Romans wanted noise, noise meant fear. The monkey, the mockery of humanity. Monkeys were rare in Rome and always seen as twisted reflections of humans. Basically, you look human, but your actions were animal. The monkey brought the chaotic, unpredictable energy. If you've ever seen a monkey steal food, throw things, or yell at tourists, you can imagine this part pretty well. The snake, the eternal symbol of evil. And finally, the snake. Probably the most symbolic animal of all. Romans brought snakes into the sack to show nature itself turning against the criminal. Snakes meant danger, betrayal, and the fear that sneaks up on you when you least expect it. Also, practical note, snakes in a closed space filled with terrified animals? Absolute bedlam. Step 3, sewing the sack shut. Once the animals and the condemned person were inside, the sack was stitched closed. No gaps, no air holes, no escape plan. The message was clear. You polluted the world, so now the world is closing its doors on you. This moment was so important that records say it was done slowly, carefully, with great ceremony. Rome wasn't shy about making everyone watch. This was meant to haunt the audience for years. Step 4, into the water. Now the final stage, the sack was carried to a river, often the Tiber, and thrown in. Sometimes it was tossed from a height. Sometimes it was placed gently, almost politely. Either way, once it hit the water, everything inside fought for survival. This wasn't just about death. It was about symbolism. Romans believed that burying a parricide would pollute the earth. Burning them would pollute the air. So the only option left? Water. The river carried the curse away from the city so the community could stay clean. People would gather along the riverbanks and watch the sack sink. It was probably silent for a moment, just the sound of waves. Before everyone slowly walked home feeling a little shaken, and maybe a little more grateful for their own families. Why Romans thought parricide polluted the city. Ancient Romans believed strongly in something called pietas, which was a deep sense of duty toward family, gods, and country. If you destroyed your own parent, you weren't just breaking a rule, you were tearing a hole in the moral fabric of Rome. They believed crimes like this sent invisible pollution into the air, angered the gods, and threatened the well-being of everyone. So punishing the criminal was also protecting the entire city. In a way, it was crime control mixed with spiritual antivirus. Was pena culei common? Surprisingly, no. It was extremely rare. This might seem shocking, since Rome had no problem executing people for all sorts of things. But parricide was unusual, and proving it was hard. Still, the Romans kept talking about the Pena Cullii, writing about it, and reminding everyone it existed. Basically, is it common? No. Is it terrifying enough to keep kids from yelling at their parents? Absolutely. The punishment evolves. Over time, the ritual changed. Some eras skipped certain animals. Some added more beating. Some dropped the sack entirely and used different methods. But the core idea stayed the same across centuries. A parricide was so unnatural that their death had to be unnatural too. Even late Roman writers still talked about the Pena Cullii with a mix of horror and fascination, kind of like we do now. Final thoughts. The Pena Cullii remains one of the most chilling yet strangely symbolic punishments in Roman history. It wasn't just about killing someone, it was about making a statement that echoed across the entire empire. Family matters. And if you break the biggest rule, Rome breaks you back. Creatively. It's dark. It's dramatic. It's absolutely something only ancient Rome would come up with. And thankfully, it stayed in ancient Rome. If there is one thing ancient Rome loved more than drama, it was extra drama. And nothing says extra like throwing a person into an arena with a lion who hasn't eaten lunch yet. Welcome to damnatio ad bestias, which basically means, condemned to the beasts. This punishment is famous today thanks to movies, memes, and every slow-motion shot of a gladiator staring down a big cat. But the real story is even wilder, literally. Rome didn't invent the idea of using animals for punishment out of nowhere. In fact, the roots go way back, long before emperors, marble arenas, and expensive sandals. Origins, before Rome went full arena mode. Long before the Colosseum, earlier Latin tribes had rituals where criminals were exposed to the wild. It wasn't meant to entertain a crowd. It was more like, you messed up, and nature will handle the rest. These early punishments were spiritual. They believed that certain crimes angered the gods, so sending the criminal out to be judged by beasts was a way to restore cosmic balance. It was harsh, but it wasn't meant to be a show. But oh, Rome changed that. Once Rome grew stronger, richer, and more dramatic, they added seats, tickets, music, and snacks. Give Rome a simple ritual, and it will turn it into a full entertainment package. What started as a grim tribal act became a star attraction in the arena. How the arena became a zoo of doom. By the late Republic and early Empire, the Romans had a whole system for matching criminals with animals. And it wasn't random. This wasn't, throw him in and hope something exciting happens. No, Rome planned these things like mini-movies. Criminals could face lions, the classics. Big, loud, dramatic. Perfect for opening acts. Panthers, sleek and fast, for when you wanted surprise attacks. Boars, which were basically ancient tanks with tusks. Bears, sometimes even trained ones, because of course Rome trained bears. And sometimes packs of dogs for group performances. The idea was simple, pick a beast that created fear, suspense, and spectacle. Even the emperor sometimes decided the pairings. Imagine him sitting there like a producer choosing a fight card. And yes, sometimes the crowd got to shout suggestions. Lion. No, panther. No, bring out the bear. Rome really needed Netflix. Stagecraft, when execution meets theater. Now here is where Rome shows its true personality. Punishment wasn't enough, they needed showmanship. They needed flair. They needed stagecraft. Criminals were often dressed in costumes, reenacting myths or legendary stories. Some examples. A man who stole something might be dressed as a thief from a famous Roman legend. Someone who insulted the gods might be dressed like a character from mythology who angered Jupiter. A prisoner might even play a role in a tragic story like Actaeon being torn by his own hounds. It was theater, except the ending was not acting. The arena crew even built props, fake forests, miniature temples, painted backdrops. Sometimes the sand itself was dyed red before the show. Rome invented special effects long before Hollywood. And the animals? Sometimes they were trained to perform certain moves, like chasing on cue or attacking targets. So imagine being punished and having to act in a play. That's a whole new kind of pressure. Victims, not just criminals. While Rome claimed this punishment was for serious criminals, the definition of serious changed depending on who was in charge. The list of victims expanded over time, and some of it was not pretty. Christians. Early Christians were often thrown into the arena not because they committed crimes, but because the state saw them as rebels against Roman religion. Their refusal to honor Roman gods was viewed as dangerous. So they became dramatic examples, usually paired with lions, which the crowd loved. Prisoners of war. Captured warriors from conquered lands were used to send a message. Rome wins. You lose. And now everyone watches you lose again. It was brutal propaganda. Rebels. Anyone who challenged Rome's authority, whether politically, militarily, or even socially, could end up in the arena. The state believed fear kept people loyal. And nothing creates fear like seeing a rebel get tossed to a panther. The saddest part is that many victims weren't criminals at all. They were just unlucky people caught in the machinery of empire. What it did to spectators. Now, let's talk about the crowd. Thousands of people watched these punishments. Families came. Couples came. Kids came. It was like a giant sports event, but with more roaring. So what did this do to the Roman mind? 1. It normalized violence. When you see people get eaten by lions on a Saturday morning, your idea of normal changes a bit. Romans got used to blood in the sand. They viewed suffering as part of civic life. 2. It made the state look powerful. Every time the beasts came out, the message was clear. Rome controls life and death. Rome controls nature. Rome controls everything. The crowd watched the emperor as much as the criminals. His thumb decided who lived and who died. That built loyalty, or at least fear disguised as loyalty. 3. It entertained. This is the part we don't love but can't ignore. The Roman public enjoyed it. They cheered. They laughed. They gasped at dramatic moments. It was their blockbuster action movie, live. But not everyone liked it. Some writers in Rome complained, saying the games made people cruel and numb. They felt the empire was losing its soul one lion snack at a time. The state's strategy, punish and entertain at once. Rome wasn't dumb. They understood psychology. They knew that if people feared the state but also enjoyed the show, they were easier to manage. So damnatio ad bestias had two goals. Goal 1, terrify potential criminals. Watching someone get mauled by a huge cat was a powerful warning. It screamed, "Don't break the rules." Seriously. Goal 2, keep the crowd happy. Free entertainment meant loyalty. While the people cheered the action, they also felt connected to Rome's power. Bread and circuses, as the old saying goes. This combination, fear plus fun, was one of the secrets of Roman political control. Final thoughts. Damnatio ad bestias is one of those Roman practices that shocks us today. It mixes theater, violence, religion, politics, and entertainment into one loud, chaotic package. It started as a simple tribal ritual but evolved into a national spectacle that shaped Roman identity. It showed the world Rome's strength, but it also revealed Rome's darkest side, a state that used death as entertainment and fear as a tool. Wild animals, roaring crowds, costumes, myths, propaganda, no wonder this punishment still fascinates people today. It's dramatic, terrifying, and strangely symbolic. It tells us how far Rome would go to control its people and impress its empire. Thankfully, the lions of modern times are mostly in zoos. And nobody is being asked to reenact myths in front of 50,000 screaming spectators. At least, not yet. If you lived in ancient Rome and someone asked, "Hey, want to go watch an execution today?" you might say, "Sure, what time? Before lunch?" That's because the Colosseum wasn't just a place for gladiators to fight, it was the ultimate entertainment center, and public executions were basically the opening act. Imagine going to a concert, and instead of a band warming up, you get a guy being dramatically flung off a fake cliff. Yeah. Rome was different. Executions weren't hidden away. They weren't quiet. They weren't private. They were part of the show, performed in front of 50,000 cheering people. Rome managed to take the darkest part of the justice system and turn it into, well, theater. Let's break down how punishment became performance. Pre-show entertainment. Before the gladiators, we have a burning. Before the real gladiator matches began, the ones everyone paid to see, the Romans warmed up the crowd with executions. It sounds unbelievable, but to them it was totally normal. Families would take their kids, buy snacks, and settle in early so they didn't miss the morning special features. While the sun was still rising over the arena walls, criminals were brought out, and the fun began. Some were thrown to beasts. Some were forced to fight trained fighters they had no chance against. Others were used in elaborate shows the Colosseum crew designed like little violent plays. The executions were basically the appetizer of the entertainment world. Grim, yes. But to Romans? Just part of a good day out. Creative, and completely absurd, forms of punishment. Romans didn't just punish people. They got creative. They built entire scenes, props, and machines to make each execution memorable. They had a reputation to maintain, after all. Here are some of the most absurd and shocking methods, all used to keep the audience engaged before the gladiator battles. Mythological reenactments. You're playing Icarus today, good luck. Rome loved mythology, and they loved irony. So instead of just killing criminals, they staged famous myths where the character dies. And the criminal? Congratulations, you're the star. Icarus. You know the story. Icarus flies too close to the sun, the wax melts, and he falls. Rome recreated this by strapping wings to a man and launching him off a tall platform. No wax, no sun. Just gravity doing its job. The crowd loved it. It was educational, in the worst way. Orpheus. In the myth, Orpheus is torn apart by wild creatures. In the arena, a man dressed as Orpheus would play a lyre until the handlers released a bunch of animals. You can guess the rest. Imagine pitching this idea to the arena director. So he plays a little music, then, boom, animals. Approved. Hercules. This one got complicated. Hercules completed many dangerous tasks, but in Rome's version, the hero was usually a condemned man placed in an impossible situation. Sometimes he faced a lion with no real weapon. Sometimes he reenacted the burning of Hercules and died in an actual fire. These shows weren't really about mythology. They were about giving executions a storyline. And apparently nothing warmed up a Roman crowd like a dramatic retelling with a very real ending. Burning, impalement, and mechanical devices. The Colosseum wasn't just a fancy stadium, it was a giant machine. Under the sand, dozens of lifts, trapdoors, and pulleys allowed workers to pull off shocking effects. And the punishments? They took full advantage. Burning alive. Sometimes a condemned man played a mythological character who died in flames. The arena staff built fake pyres and fake temples, but the fire was real. Romans didn't hide the brutality. They packaged it as art. Impalement. In some shows, criminals were placed on spikes or giant spears to imitate the deaths of mythological villains. The props were designed to look decorative, carved wood, painted scenes, but the ending wasn't theatrical at all. Mechanical traps. This was where Rome went full engineer mode. The Colosseum had spring-loaded platforms that flung people into pits, hidden doors that released animals, rotating scenery for dramatic reveals, elevators lifting beasts into the arena like surprise party guests. It was a special effects playground, long before CGI. Imagine being a criminal dragged into the arena, seeing a fake castle or forest set up, and thinking, oh no, I'm in a myth again. The blurred line between justice and performance. At some point, even Romans questioned what their arena had become. Was this justice? Punishment? Theater? Something in between? The lines got blurred because the crowd was there for entertainment, not morality. The state used violence to show power, not just to punish. Theatrical executions felt like part of the show, not legal consequences. Someone might die because of a crime, but the execution wasn't focused on fairness. It was focused on spectacle. Rome didn't hide this. They embraced it. For many spectators, the execution didn't feel like a government action. It felt like a live-action myth or drama. That softened the horror. It made everything feel unreal, even though it was very real. And that was exactly what the state wanted. Why executions became bedtime entertainment for Roman families. This part might be the wildest. Today, telling your kid about a violent show before bed is not exactly a warm, cozy moment. But in Rome? Kids grew up hearing stories about gladiators and beasts and heroic myths, told with real-life examples they saw earlier that day. Why was this acceptable? Reason 1. It reinforced Roman values. Rome believed bravery, strength, and discipline were virtues. Watching violence was supposed to build toughness, not fear. Reason 2, death was normal. Life was hard. People died young. Danger was everywhere. A public execution wasn't shocking, it was everyday life with better seating. Reason 3, it bonded families. Believe it or not, spending a day at the arena was considered quality family time. You talk, you laugh, you cheer, you watch a reenactment of a burning myth character. Then you go home for dinner. Normal. Reason 4, the Colosseum was the empire's pride. Rome wanted everyone, even children, to feel connected to its power. The arena showed Rome's strength, wealth, and creativity. It said, look what we can build. Look what we can do. So by bedtime, many Roman kids weren't scared, they were excited. They replayed the shows in their minds like we replay movies today. It's dark, yes. But it's how their world worked. Final thoughts. The Colosseum wasn't just a stadium. It was a cultural machine that blended punishment with performance until nobody could tell where justice ended and entertainment began. Public executions became art pieces. Myth stories turned into deadly plays. Mechanical traps created dramatic moments. And the audience? They accepted all of it as part of daily life. When we look at the Colosseum today, quiet, grand, empty. It's hard to imagine these chaotic mornings filled with smoke, shouting, costumes, and roaring crowds. But for Romans, this was their version of prime-time entertainment. And maybe the strangest part is how casual it all felt. You go in for a show, you watch a reenactment with very real stakes, and later that night, you tuck your children into bed with stories of heroes, beasts, and brave gladiators. Rome had its own brand of bedtime storytelling, and it was anything but calm. If you think your boss is strict, be glad you didn't work for the Roman army. The Roman legions were basically the most intense workplace ever created, discipline so heavy, rules so sharp, and consequences so terrifying that even modern soldiers would say, "Okay, that's too much." Rome's army wasn't just a fighting force, it was its own universe, with laws and traditions that made civilian life look like a soft vacation. Soldiers lived together, marched together, fought together, and sometimes suffered punishments together. And Rome used fear, real fear, to keep this giant machine running. Let's walk into this world of military discipline, carefully. Because if we mess up here, the centurion might make us run the gauntlet. A world with its own rules, and brutal consequences. Roman soldiers were expected to be perfect, loyal, alert, tough, silent, and always ready to fight. A legion was supposed to move like a single body. If one man failed, the whole group could die. So the army enforced rules with an iron hand and sometimes an iron rod. Inside the legion, everything was controlled. When you sleep. When you eat. When you stand guard. How fast you march. How clean your gear looks. And yes, when you get punished. This world didn't care about excuses. Rain? Too bad. Tired? So what? Want to go home? Not happening. Rome believed that discipline is what wins wars, and anything, or anyone, that threatened discipline needed a very loud, very painful reminder. That's where the scary punishments come in. Decimation, killing 1 in 10 of failing units. If you ever feel like your team performed badly at work, at least nobody lined you up and randomly picked someone to die. The Roman army actually did this. Decimation was a punishment for units that ran away in battle, disobeyed orders, or embarrassed the army. The word comes from decim, meaning 10. It worked like this. A whole unit was gathered together. Soldiers drew lots. Every 10th man, no matter how brave, how young, or how unlucky, was executed by his own comrades. The remaining troops had to sleep outside the camp, eat poor rations, and live with the guilt. Imagine being soldier number 9 and thinking, please not me, while sweating harder than on a desert march. Decimation wasn't common, but when it happened, it sent a message through the entire army. Failure is not an option. Fear is part of the uniform. It was psychological warfare inside the army itself. And Rome believed it worked. Running the gauntlet, beaten by the entire legion. If you ever complained about group projects, here's a Roman version: the entire group beats you. One of the most common army punishments was fustuarium, also known as running the gauntlet. The guilty soldier would be forced to run between 2 long lines of his fellow soldiers, all holding sticks, clubs, or whips. Everyone swung at him as he ran. And yes, the unit was expected to hit hard. Too soft, and they might get punished too. This was used for theft, desertion, behavior that endangered the unit, breaking formation, and sometimes just plain stupidity. The idea was that the legion punished itself to keep itself strong. It made everyone feel responsible for maintaining discipline. Also, it guaranteed nobody wanted to be the next person running between 2 rows of angry men with sticks. Honestly, just watching someone run the gauntlet was probably enough motivation to follow every rule in the book. Execution for falling asleep on watch. This one might sound extreme, but for Rome, it made perfect sense. If a soldier fell asleep while guarding the camp, the entire army could be attacked at night. A whole legion, thousands of men, could die because one guy decided to take a quick nap. So the punishment was simple. Fall asleep on watch, and you die. There was no second chance. No, but I was tired. No, my alarm didn't ring. The centurions had zero sympathy. Even veteran soldiers who served for years were not spared if they messed up this one job. To make it worse, the execution was often public, right in front of the whole legion, to remind everyone what was at stake. Some armies carved warnings into tents. Others made soldiers pair up and check each other. Anything to avoid the deadly nap. You can imagine the soldiers trying every trick to stay awake. Singing quietly. Slapping their own faces. Chewing whatever plant they could find. Praying a friend would whisper, "Hey, wake up," if they nodded off. This rule kept the army alive, but it added a layer of stress that never left the soldiers. How Rome believed fear kept the empire standing. Rome didn't pretend the army was built on love or inspiration. They believed in something much stronger, fear. They thought fear kept soldiers alert. Fear kept units loyal. Fear kept commanders respected. But most of all, fear kept the empire safe. Here are the key beliefs behind their system. 1. Fear stopped rebellion. If punishments were brutal, nobody dared to challenge orders. 2. Fear created unity. Soldiers trusted each other more when they knew everyone was terrified of failing. 3. Fear made soldiers tough. Rome believed softness was a disease. Pain was the medicine. 4. Fear impressed enemies. When opposing armies heard rumors of Roman discipline, they sometimes surrendered without a fight. Was it harsh? Yes. Did Rome think it was necessary? Also yes. Rome built an empire stretching across 3 continents, and they credited much of that success to discipline enforced by terror. Commanders known for extreme discipline. Of course, not all commanders were equal. Some were strict. Some were terrifying. Some became legends because soldiers feared them more than the enemy. Lucius Cornelius Sulla. Sulla believed in harsh punishment at all times. His soldiers adored him, but only because they feared him. If a unit broke discipline, he didn't hesitate to decimate it. Yet his discipline made his army nearly unbeatable. Marcus Licinius Crassus. Crassus famously used decimation on troops who fled during the Third Servile War. His methods were brutal, but he wanted to revive Roman pride after embarrassing defeats. Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, Pompey the Great. Pompey wasn't as extreme as others, but he enforced control with a cold, calm style that scared soldiers just as much. He expected perfection. Anything less was punished quickly. Germanicus. Known as a beloved commander, Germanicus still used harsh discipline when needed. The difference? His troops respected him so deeply that even when he punished them, they felt loyal. Varus. Famously lost 3 legions in the Teutoburg forest. After that disaster, Rome looked at him as an example of what bad discipline could lead to. His story became a warning taught to soldiers for generations. These commanders shaped the army. And through their discipline, sometimes effective, sometimes horrifying, they shaped the empire itself. Final thoughts. The Roman military wasn't just an army. It was a disciplined machine powered by fear. Rome believed that only through terror could they hold their empire together. Decimation reminded soldiers that failure brought death. Running the gauntlet kept everyone sharp. Sleeping on watch could destroy a man's life in seconds. Was it brutal? Absolutely. Did it work? Rome thought so, and history kind of agrees. This chapter shows the darker side of the Roman success story. Behind every victory was a legion trained not just with drills and courage, but with the constant pressure of punishment. The empire marched forward on roads built by soldiers who were too afraid to step out of line. Being a Roman citizen was like having a VIP badge for the ancient world. You got rights, legal protection, and a sense that the state cared about your well-being, at least more than it cared about slaves or foreigners. But here's the twist: citizen privilege had limits. Push too far, annoy the wrong people, insult the wrong emperor, or just be a little too famous, and Rome could still punish you in ways you would never expect. Roman citizenship didn't make you untouchable. It just meant your punishment came with extra paperwork and fewer wild animals. Let's walk through how Rome disciplined its own favorite children, and why sometimes privilege wasn't enough to save a person. Citizens were protected, but only up to a point. In theory, Roman citizens were shielded from the brutal punishments used on slaves and non-citizens. They couldn't be crucified. They couldn't be thrown to beasts. They couldn't be beaten to death. And they almost never faced torture. Citizens had the right of appeal. They could demand a trial. They could even shout, "Civis Romana sum." I am a Roman citizen, like a magical shield. But theory and reality didn't always match. The law said one thing. Emperors sometimes said, yeah, no. Not today. When the system worked, it protected citizens well. When it didn't, it was usually because a powerful man got annoyed. Exile, relegatio versus deportatio. Rome absolutely loved exile. If the state didn't want to kill you but also didn't want to see your face ever again, exile was perfect. There were two types. 1. Relegatio. This was the gentle version. You weren't imprisoned. You kept your citizenship. Your property stayed yours. You just had to leave Rome and live far away. Think of it like the government saying, "We don't hate you, but please go be interesting somewhere else." Writers, poets, and annoying politicians often got this. 2. Deportatio. This one was way harsher. You lost your citizenship. Your property was confiscated. You were sent to a remote island. Leaving the island meant death. This was the Roman version of, "You're dead to us, but technically alive." The two types of exile mattered a lot. One meant inconvenience. The other meant your entire identity vanished. Confiscation of property and loss of citizenship. Rome understood something powerful: if you want to hurt someone important, don't hit them, hit their wallet. Confiscating property was common in political cases. It could ruin a family overnight. Homes, lands, money, slaves, furniture, even clothing, gone. Losing citizenship was even worse. Citizenship was everything. Legal protection. Social status. Identity. The right to appeal. The right to not die in horrible ways. Once you lost it, you were basically thrown into the "everyone else" category where punishments were far darker. Rome didn't have to lift a weapon. They just took your name and status. And that alone could destroy you. Beating forbidden, unless they really wanted to. One of the proud rules of Rome was, do not beat citizens. Beating was for slaves, criminals, and people Rome didn't care about. But, rules in Rome were flexible when convenient. If the Senate declared an emergency, or if the emperor felt creative, citizens suddenly weren't so protected anymore. A citizen could be whipped if they committed treason. They insulted the emperor. They were part of a riot. Or the emperor was simply in a bad mood. Some emperors used the law carefully. Others used it like a toy. Citizens often lived with the fear that their rights depended on who held the throne. So yes, citizens had protections. But those protections had little stars and footnotes. When emperors ignored the rules entirely. Let's keep this simple: some emperors didn't care about the law at all. A few examples. Caligula. He punished people because he felt bored. He reportedly ordered citizens to be beaten, exiled, or even executed for tiny reasons, like wearing clothes he didn't like. Nero. He treated laws as suggestions. He exiled, punished, or killed senators who annoyed him. He also forced people to voluntarily kill themselves to avoid formal execution. Domitian. He punished citizens secretly, using fear to control the Senate. Many nobles disappeared without clear charges. Rome loved the idea of law, until a powerful ruler decided they didn't. Then punishment became more about politics than justice. Case Study 1, Cicero, punished for saving Rome. Cicero, the famous orator, loved Rome. He loved speeches even more. But his loud mouth got him in trouble. He once executed several conspirators without a trial. Many people thought this was heroic. Others said, Cicero, that's illegal. Years later, his political enemies used this against him. The state didn't kill him, they punished him with exile. His property was seized. His house was destroyed. His name was humiliated. He eventually came back, but the message was clear. Even the greatest speaker in Rome could be silenced. Case Study 2, Ovid, banished for a mystery crime. The poet Ovid wrote love poems. Nothing too dangerous. But then, suddenly, Emperor Augustus exiled him to the edge of the empire, in cold, miserable Tomies, modern Romania. Ovid said the reason was a poem and a mistake. He never explained the mistake. Theories include: he witnessed something he shouldn't have. He got mixed up in imperial gossip. His poetry annoyed Augustus. Or the emperor just needed someone to blame. Ovid lived the rest of his life in exile, writing sad poetry about missing Rome. His case became the classic example of how unpredictable Roman punishment could be, even for a citizen. Case Study 3, Others who suffered creative punishments. Seneca. Forced to commit suicide by Nero. Agrippa Posthumus. Exiled and later murdered after political shifts. Rufus and Gallus. Lost citizenship and wealth overnight because they angered powerful men. Roman citizens lived with this tension: the law protected them, unless the wrong person wanted them gone. Final thoughts. Being a Roman citizen came with rights, status, and pride. But it didn't make you untouchable. Rome punished citizens in ways that were less bloody than slave punishments, but just as devastating. Exile could erase your life. Confiscation could destroy your family. Loss of citizenship could turn you into nobody. And if an emperor ignored the rules, the law couldn't save you at all. Citizenship was power, but it was also fragile. One mistake, one political enemy, one angry emperor, and privilege wasn't enough to protect you. Rome believed its legal system was fair and balanced. But history shows a different truth: sometimes justice depended less on the law and more on who held the throne. If you think modern courtrooms can be dramatic, ancient Rome takes things to a whole new spiritual level. For Romans, crime wasn't just, you broke the rule. It was, you offended the gods, and now the universe is side-eyeing us. Roman punishment wasn't only legal, it was religious. Rome believed every crime created a kind of spiritual pollution, like cosmic dirt, and if the state didn't clean it up fast enough, the gods might send bad weather, disease, earthquakes, or, worst of all, political chaos. So Rome turned punishment into ritual. Every execution, every exile, every act of violence the state performed came wrapped in symbolic gestures meant to calm divine anger. Let's walk through this world where law meets religion, and where even the timing of an execution mattered more than the execution itself. Crime as sacrilege, not just wrongdoing. Romans didn't separate law and religion the way we do today. For them, laws came from the gods, and breaking them felt like breaking the natural order. If someone committed murder, theft, or even fraud, people whispered, "The gods won't like this." The Romans feared not only the crime's damage but the spiritual mess it left behind. Crimes were like stains on the city's soul. And if left unpunished, the stain spread. The logic went like this. If one person sinned and the state ignored it, the gods punished everyone. So everyone had a reason to support harsh justice. It wasn't cruelty, it was self-defense. Or at least that's what they told themselves. Even small offenses required purification rituals. Big crimes needed major ceremonies. And the person punished wasn't the only one on trial, the entire city was, too. Executions at dawn, crossroads, or outside the city. One of the strangest parts of Roman punishment was location. Romans believed that where you died mattered just as much as why. Executions at dawn. Dawn symbolized a fresh start, a new day, and the gods waking up to check if humans were behaving. Punishing criminals at sunrise showed the gods. We took care of the problem before breakfast. Also, dawn light felt clean. Pure. Romans loved symbolism like that. Crossroads. A crossroads was a magical place, multiple paths, multiple destinies, and, for Rome, a perfect dumping spot for spiritual pollution. If you executed someone at a crossroads, the spirits could scatter in any direction. No single neighborhood got cursed. Fair enough, I guess. Crossroads were also connected to underworld gods like Hecate. Executing someone there was like handing them over personally. Here, you deal with this soul. Outside the city boundary. The Pomerium, Rome's sacred boundary, was like a spiritual firewall. Inside it, everything was holy and protected. Outside it? That's where dangerous things happened. So executions often took place outside the city so the spiritual pollution wouldn't splash onto Rome's sacred core. It was the ancient version of, do it outside, I don't want to clean up afterward. Purification rituals around punishment. Romans didn't just punish, they purified. Everything had a ritual. Priests inspected the omens. Officials performed symbolic gestures. The criminal might be stripped of citizenship clothing. Animals were sacrificed. Purifying water or fire was used. Even the tools of the execution had to be purified afterward. It wasn't enough to kill the criminal. You had to clean up the spiritual mess the crime left behind. Sometimes the ritual was bigger than the punishment. A person might be executed in minutes, but the ritual prep could take hours. This tells you one thing, the punishment was for humans, but the ritual was for the gods. Romans saw themselves as caretakers of cosmic order. If they skipped a purification step, they risked angering divine forces that could ruin crops, sink ships, or make the emperor look weak. And nobody wanted that. Magical thinking and omens in punishment decisions. Rome didn't make decisions based on evidence only. They used birds, lightning, dreams, and priestly interpretation. If a punishment was scheduled and the omens were bad, maybe an eagle flew the wrong direction, or lightning hit the wrong tree, the execution could be delayed. Imagine being the criminal. We're postponing your punishment because a chicken refused to eat. Wait, what? Yes. That happened. Magical thinking played a huge role. A sudden storm meant the gods weren't ready for the soul. A strange noise during a ritual meant, try again tomorrow. A priest stumbling over a word meant the ceremony was invalid. Even the direction smoke blew mattered. Rome looked for signs everywhere. They believed the gods gave hints, like cosmic comment boxes. And they feared punishing someone at the wrong time, because that could offend the very gods they were trying to please. Divine signals mattered more than schedules. A lucky animal omen could save your life. An unlucky one could doom you. Justice wasn't just legal, it was mystical. Why Romans believed the gods punished the city if the courts failed. Rome had a heavy burden, keep the gods happy or pay the price. If a crime went unpunished, Romans believed the gods took revenge on the entire community. This idea was called communal guilt. One person's sin could curse thousands. Signs of divine anger included drought, plagues, military defeats, crop failure, earthquakes. Strange omens in the sky. If any of these happened, people asked. Okay, who angered the gods? What sin did we miss? Sometimes the Senate even did investigations, not to find the criminal but to find the source of divine anger. If they decided the gods were unhappy with the courts, they increased punishments. Rome believed justice wasn't optional. It was survival. This belief also explains why punishments were public. The whole community needed to witness the cleansing act so everyone felt the spiritual balance was restored. A crime harmed Rome. A punishment healed it. Final thoughts. To Romans, punishment wasn't just about law or fear. It was about keeping the universe balanced. Every execution, every exile, every ritual step was part of a spiritual conversation between Rome and its gods. Crimes polluted the city. Punishments purified it. Dawn symbolized rebirth. Crossroads carried away spirits. The city boundary protected holy ground. Omens guided decisions. Priests watched for signs. Rituals wrapped everything in divine approval. Romans didn't see punishment as cruelty, they saw it as cosmic housekeeping. Their world was a place where justice, religion, magic, and fear blended into one powerful system. And if the courts failed, the gods stepped in, and nobody wanted that. In the end, Roman punishment wasn't just a legal act. It was a sacred duty. A drama performed not only for people, but for the gods watching from above. If you ever wondered what happens when a single person has unlimited power, unlimited money, and absolutely no one brave enough to say, hey, maybe don't do that, welcome to the world of the Roman emperors. Some emperors were wise. Some were decent. And some, well, invented punishments like a kid inventing new house rules during a board game. By the time men like Caligula, Nero, Commodus, and Domitian were in charge, Rome had moved from strong leadership to please don't make eye contact with the emperor or he might execute you for blinking wrong. Let's dive into how absolute power went absolutely wild, and how the emperors turned punishment into a personal hobby. Emperors who invented new punishments. Rome already had a long list of ways to punish people. But a few emperors looked at that list and said, not creative enough. Then they made their own, usually worse. Caligula. Caligula treated punishment like entertainment. He would order executions during dinner so he could enjoy the view between bites. He once executed a man simply because he didn't like the guy's expression. When someone mentioned that another man had committed a crime, Caligula said, let's punish him now. He may commit it later. Logic, 0. Power trip, maximum. Nero. Nero loved drama. He didn't want simple executions, he wanted performances. People sometimes died in ways that matched his moods, his songs, or whatever play he was currently obsessed with. He invented flamboyant punishments, including slow, theatrical deaths carried out on decorated stages. Rome didn't know whether to fear him or buy tickets. Commodus. Commodus believed he was a gladiator. No, really, he thought he was the best gladiator alive. So he punished senators by humiliating them in the arena, forcing them to watch his fights, and threatening to kill them if they didn't applaud loudly enough. He didn't need a justice system. He had muscles and ego. Domitian. Domitian ruled through fear. He loved secret executions and midnight disappearances. He punished senators for rumors, dreams, or even silence. If he sensed disloyalty, real or imagined, someone died. Unlike Caligula or Nero, Domitian wasn't flashy. He was cold, efficient, and quietly terrifying. Executions ordered for trivial reasons. When absolute power mixes with absolute paranoia, you get a long list of ridiculous execution triggers. Under these emperors, people died for a joke made in the wrong direction, a hairstyle the emperor disliked, wearing a nicer outfit than the emperor, being too quiet, being too loud, existing on a day the emperor felt grumpy. One man was executed because his astrological chart looked threatening. Another because he corrected the emperor's pronunciation. Another because he sold a bathhouse that Caligula wanted, without knowing Caligula wanted it. No one was safe. Senators trembled. Poets stayed silent. Servants walked around like they were invisible. Imagine living in a world where your emperor could walk by, say, I don't like your vibe, and boom, you're gone. Rome wasn't just a political system. Under these rulers, it was a workplace with the worst boss in human history. The Golden Punishment, Nero's theatrical executions. Nero, always the performer, took punishment and turned it into artistic spectacle. One of his most infamous inventions was what historians call the Golden Punishment. Nero would coat victims in wax or pitch, dress them in beautiful robes, then tie them to tall posts. At night, during garden parties, he lit them on fire so they burned like glowing statues. He used people as lamps. To Nero, this wasn't horror, it was ambience. A lighting choice. Something to set the mood while he played music. Guests were expected to admire the scene, while pretending not to panic. The cruelty wasn't just the death. It was the show. The symbolism. The emperor saying, I decide how the night shines. This punishment showed how far imperial imagination could go, and how far Rome had drifted from its old values. Damnatio memoriae, erasing someone from history. Sometimes emperors didn't want to kill someone physically. Sometimes they wanted to kill their memory. This was called damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory. It meant wiping a person out of existence symbolically. The punished person would have their name chipped off monuments, their statues destroyed, their portraits scraped away, their legal rights voided, their family dishonored. In a world without digital records, this was powerful. Erasing someone's memory meant erasing their identity, their career, their honor, everything. It wasn't death of the body. It was death of the self. Senators feared damnatio memoriae more than execution. Dying was fast. Being erased was forever. Ironically, we now remember the people Rome tried hardest to erase. History loves a good scandal. How fear of imperial wrath shaped Roman politics. Living under emperors like Caligula, Nero, Commodus, or Domitian meant living in a constant state of anxiety. One wrong gesture could end your life. One misunderstood sentence could doom your family. This fear shaped Roman politics in several ways. 1. Senators became actors. They applauded louder, praised harder, and pretended to adore even the most ridiculous imperial habits. If the emperor wanted to be worshipped as a god, senators said, of course, absolutely, great idea. 2. Honesty disappeared. No one dared speak truth. Advisors gave flattering advice instead of real advice. And emperors got more unstable because they lived in echo chambers. 3. Conspiracies grew. Fear made people plot. Paranoia made emperors act harsher. And Rome became a cycle of killing and revenge. 4. Loyalty became suspicious. If you were too friendly, the emperor feared you had ambitions. If you were too quiet, he feared you were plotting. If you were too smart, well, that was the worst. Under these rulers, the safest political strategy was simple. Stand still. Speak softly. Never look too competent. Final thoughts. The punishments of the emperors show what happens when power becomes personal, when justice turns into the emperor's mood, creativity, or boredom. Caligula killed for fun. Nero killed for art. Commodus killed for applause. Domitian killed for control. Their punishments weren't about the law. They were about fear, fear that spread through the Senate, through the army, through every corner of Rome. Damnatio Memoriae tried to erase people from history, yet ironically made us remember them. The golden punishment showed how twisted imperial imagination could get. And executions for trivial reasons turned politics into a survival game. In these emperors' hands, punishment became less about justice and more about personality, wild, unstable, and terrifying. For Romans living under them, the message was clear. When absolute power goes mad, everyone else pays the price. In ancient Rome, swinging a sword was respectable. Running a farm was respectable. Even shouting in the Senate was respectable. But thinking too much? Writing too much? Asking questions about power? That was suspicious. Philosophers and poets were loved when their ideas pleased the elite. But when their ideas challenged authority, emperors suddenly decided intellectuals were the most dangerous people in the empire. Not soldiers. Not rebels. Not invading tribes. Writers. Rome saw ideas as weapons, and honestly, they weren't wrong. A sharp sentence could cut deeper than a blade, especially when aimed at the emperor's ego. So intellectuals became targets of strange, symbolic punishments: burned books, forced suicides, erased reputations, and public shaming. Let's explore why Rome feared thinkers, and how those thinkers fought back. Why intellectuals were seen as dangerous. Rome didn't hate smart people. Rome hated smart people with opinions. Especially opinions about freedom, justice, and how the emperor should behave. Intellectuals threatened Rome because 1. They shaped public opinion. A poem could spread gossip. A speech could spark rebellion. A philosophical text could make the emperor look small. Ideas traveled faster than armies. 2. They encouraged questioning. And tyrants hate questions. What is justice? What is virtue? Should a ruler follow the law? Those are fun in classrooms, less fun for paranoid emperors. 3. They taught young elites. A philosopher could influence the next generation of senators. One rebellious idea could sneak into a powerful family and cause political trouble later. 4. They refused to flatter. While everyone else praised emperors like gods, intellectuals stayed calm, logical, unimpressed. That alone was suspicious behavior in the empire. Rome feared thinkers because you can't execute an idea. You can try, though, and Rome definitely did. Book burnings as punitive acts. Rome loved literature so much that wealthy families kept entire libraries at home. But when the state felt threatened, all that culture went straight into the fire. Book burning was a symbolic punishment. It silenced the author. It erased dangerous ideas. It warned others, write carefully, or else. Nero burned works he didn't like. Domitian burned philosophical texts. Caligula banned books that reminded him of his own flaws. Even Augustus, who pretended to love order, burned thousands of prophetic writings that didn't fit his image. Sometimes the author was executed. Sometimes only the books were punished. Imagine being a poet waking up one morning and hearing, "Good news, you're alive. Bad news, your entire life's work is now smoke." Rome understood something important. Destroy the books, and you destroy the mind that created them. Or at least, you try. Forced suicides, honorable, yet completely coerced. One of the strangest punishments for intellectuals was forced suicide. It sounds like a contradiction, and it was. Here's how it worked. The emperor ordered someone to kill themselves. This avoided public trial and scandal. The victim could die, honorably. Their family often got to keep their property. But everyone knew it wasn't honorable, it was a polite execution. A symbolic way of saying, you die, but you die neatly. Many Stoics accepted this punishment with calm dignity, believing that choosing death was the final form of freedom. Others felt it was a cruel trick, using philosophy against the philosophers themselves. No matter how they felt, forced suicide became a signature punishment for intellectuals who spoke too boldly. How Stoics and senators resisted tyranny. The Stoics were Rome's philosophical rebels. They believed virtue mattered more than power. Emotions should be controlled. Freedom comes from inner strength. And tyrants were morally empty. You can imagine how emperors reacted to this. Stoics resisted tyranny by refusing to flatter rulers, speaking truth during trials, writing texts about moral leadership, staying calm even when threatened. To emperors, this calmness looked like rebellion. A man who couldn't be scared was a dangerous man. Senators influenced by Stoicism often opposed emperors in subtle ways. Voting against unjust laws, refusing to participate in flattery rituals, or openly criticizing corruption. Many paid for this resistance with their lives. But to Stoics, moral integrity was worth more than survival. They believed a good death mattered more than a long life lived in fear. This philosophy turned them into quiet heroes, and frequent targets. Case study: Seneca, the philosopher forced to die. Seneca was one of Rome's greatest thinkers. He was a playwright, a philosopher, a teacher, an advisor to Nero. At first, he tried to guide the young emperor toward wisdom. But Nero didn't want wisdom. He wanted applause, music, and power. When Nero turned paranoid, he blamed Seneca for a conspiracy. Whether Seneca was involved or not, nobody knows. But Nero ordered him to commit suicide. Seneca accepted calmly. He believed death wasn't a tragedy, it was part of nature. So he opened his veins, surrounded by friends, and tried to make the scene as dignified as possible. His death became a symbol of Stoic courage and of imperial cruelty. Nero may have killed him physically, but Seneca's idea survived, and outlived the emperor who feared him. Case study: Thrasea Paetus, the senator who stayed silent. Thrasea Paetus was a senator who disliked tyranny. Unlike other senators who pretended to adore Nero, Thrasea simply did not show up. He skipped ceremonies. He skipped speeches. He skipped applause sessions. Basically, he invented the ancient, silent protest. Rome noticed. Nero noticed. And if Nero notices you, that's never good. When Thrasea refused to attend a ceremony honoring Nero's singing performance, it was the final straw. Nero charged him with treason, not for an action, but for an absence. Like Seneca, Thrasea was ordered to kill himself. He did so calmly, becoming another Stoic martyr. His quiet resistance inspired many others to push back in their own ways, proving that silence can be louder than shouts. Case study: others who paid the price. Helvidius Priscus. He openly criticized the emperor's power. He refused to flatter, refused to be silent, refused to bend. So the rulers exiled him multiple times, and finally killed him. Junius Rusticus. A supporter of Stoicism, he was executed because he honored a philosopher the emperor disliked. Cremutius Cordus. A historian whose books were burned because he praised a republican hero. He chose starvation as a final protest. These people weren't rebels with swords. They were rebels with ideas, and Rome treated them like threats equal to armies. Final thoughts. Intellectuals in Rome walked a dangerous road. Their minds gave them influence, and their words gave them power, but that power made emperors nervous. Book burnings tried to erase ideas. Forced suicides tried to silence voices. Public shaming terrified others into obedience. Stoic resistance inspired bravery and punishment. Rome feared thinkers because thinkers could change the world. They could expose tyranny, embarrass emperors, or ignite rebellions without lifting a weapon. And we see a powerful truth. Sometimes the most dangerous people in an empire aren't soldiers or traitors, they're philosophers with a pen. When people think of ancient Roman punishments, they imagine lions, crucifixions, crazy emperors, and the Colosseum turning into a horror theater. But the truth is, most Romans lived far from that world. Ordinary people, shopkeepers, bakers, farmers, wine sellers, gossiping neighbors, feared a different set of punishments. Not dramatic deaths. Not burning gardens. Not emperors with bad tempers. Everyday Romans feared humiliation. Public embarrassment. Social shame. Moments that destroyed your reputation faster than a bad rumor at the baths. These punishments didn't kill you, but they could destroy your dignity, your business, your marriage, or your place in the community. And in a society built on honor and reputation, that sometimes hurt more than physical pain. Let's step into the daily world of Roman punishments, the ones that didn't make headlines, but definitely made people behave. Not all punishments were executions. Many were bizarre humiliations. For the average Roman, the justice system wasn't about blood and drama. It was about teaching lessons. Painful lessons. Embarrassing lessons. If you committed a small crime, like being dishonest in business, cheating on your spouse, acting rude to a magistrate, being noisy, or causing trouble in the market, you weren't going to the Colosseum. You were going to be humiliated. Rome believed shame was the most effective tool for shaping behavior. A person could forget a fine, recover from a beating, or hide a scar. But humiliation? That stuck forever. And boy, did Rome get creative. Being paraded through the streets. One of the most common punishments was a public parade, but not the fun kind with music and snacks. Imagine this. Your clothes are torn. Your hair is messed up. The crowd is staring at you. Kids are laughing. You're forced to walk through your neighborhood while everyone points and whispers. Congratulations. You've just been publicly shamed by Rome. Sometimes the criminal carried a sign explaining what they did. Thief. Adulterer. Liar. Fraudster. Other times they had to shout the crime themselves as they walked. The idea was simple. Humiliate them so thoroughly that nobody else even thinks about doing the same thing. Rome understood public pressure long before social media existed. The worst part? You still had to shop at the same market afterward. Everyone remembered. Wearing heavy wooden yokes or shackles. Another common punishment was being forced to wear a heavy wooden yoke, basically a giant wooden bar locked across your shoulders. You couldn't hide it. You couldn't move comfortably. You looked like a walking clothing rack. The point wasn't pain, though it definitely hurt. It was to show everyone that you messed up. Shackles were used too, especially for debtors or dishonest shopkeepers. A man might stand chained in the marketplace, hot sun beating down, while everyone passed by whispering. There he is. The guy who watered down the wine. Humiliation and inconvenience combined, perfect for Rome. Sometimes the yoke had bells on it so people could hear you coming. Just in case they missed the giant board strapped to your body. Public shaming for adultery or dishonesty. Romans took reputation very seriously, especially when it came to marriage and business. So public shaming was the go-to penalty for adultery. If caught cheating, a woman might be stripped of fine clothing, paraded through the street, insulted loudly, cut off from family inheritance. Men didn't always escape either. A cheating husband could be beaten by his wife's relatives or humiliated in front of neighbors. Some families even displayed the adulterer at the front door as a warning to others. Dishonesty. Shopkeepers who cheated customers were especially targeted. A man who sold bad grain or watered wine might have the spoiled goods poured over his head. Rome loved dramatic symbolism. You sold people garbage? Fine, now wear it. Lying under oath, breaking promises, or manipulating documents could also lead to public displays of shame. In a world without digital records, reputation was your entire career. Lose that, and you lost everything. Economic punishments, fines that ruined families. If humiliation didn't fix the problem, Rome used something even scarier: financial destruction. Many crimes carried heavy fines, and some were absolutely brutal. A fine could wipe out your savings, destroy your business, push your family into debt, force you to sell your home, or even lead to slavery if, worst-case scenario, you couldn't pay. Economic punishment hit where it hurt most: your ability to live. A single fine could ruin generations because wealth in Rome passed down through families. Losing property wasn't just losing land, it was losing social status, opportunities, and future marriage prospects for your children. For most Romans, the fear of financial ruin kept them more disciplined than the fear of physical pain ever could. Why shame was a powerful social weapon. Shame worked in Rome for several reasons. 1. Rome was a face-to-face society. Everyone knew everyone. Markets, baths, temples, and streets were full of familiar faces. If your reputation was damaged, there was no escape. 2. Honor meant everything. A person's public image determined who they could marry, who they could work with, who trusted them, who respected them. A bad reputation was like a permanent tattoo. 3. Shame protected the community. Rome believed humiliation taught lessons without spilling blood. It kept people in line and reinforced social values without overcrowding prisons. 4. Pain fades, shame stays. Romans understood psychology well. A beating healed. A fine might be forgotten. But being laughed at by neighbors for years? That stuck harder than any punishment. Shame was cheap, effective, and dramatic. Exactly what Rome liked. Final thoughts. Everyday punishments in ancient Rome weren't about lions, crosses, or dramatic speeches. They were about social control, plain and simple. Romans feared being paraded through the streets, wearing humiliating yokes, being chained in public, being exposed for adultery, being branded a liar, losing their money, losing their honor. These punishments didn't kill the body, they killed the reputation. And in Rome, losing honor was like losing your soul. The empire survived on discipline, and everyday punishments were its quiet but powerful tools. They kept ordinary people in line, made examples out of troublemakers, and used shame like a weapon. Rome knew something modern society sometimes forgets. You don't always need violence to control people. Sometimes, all you need is embarrassment. For centuries, Rome perfected the art of dramatic punishment: lions, crosses, fires, parades, the whole menu. But no empire stays the same forever. Slowly, the Roman world began to shift, and its system of punishments shifted too. The brutality didn't disappear overnight. There was no grand moment where someone stood up in the Colosseum and said, "Hey everyone, this seems a bit intense. Let's calm down." Instead, attitudes changed piece by piece. New religions, new rulers, new politics, and new fears reshaped the way Rome thought about crime and punishment. The empire that once treated executions like theater slowly turned toward softer, more symbolic penalties, and eventually toward imprisonment and taxes. Let's explore how Rome moved from blood-soaked sand to something more bureaucratic. The spread of Christianity changed attitudes toward public cruelty. Christianity didn't arrive in Rome with a rulebook saying, "End all brutality now." But over time, Christian ideas spread through society, and with them came a new way of thinking about suffering. Christian teaching emphasized the value of mercy, the dignity of every person, forgiveness over revenge, spiritual punishment over physical punishment. This wasn't Rome's usual style. Roman justice was loud, visible, and designed to scare people straight. Christianity, meanwhile, said, actually, maybe torture for entertainment isn't great. As Christian communities grew, they criticized public executions, especially those used for entertainment. They viewed gladiatorial games as sinful spectacles. They saw the suffering of criminals as something to mourn, not enjoy. And as emperors converted, laws followed. Constantine, for example, didn't end cruelty entirely, but he banned some punishments, including crucifixion. Later emperors gradually restricted gladiatorial shows. Bishops preached against violence. Ordinary people began to feel uncomfortable cheering for death. It didn't change everything at once, but it changed the mood. Rome was slowly losing its taste for blood. Byzantine reforms and softer penal philosophies. When the Roman world shifted eastward into the Byzantine Empire, new legal reforms reshaped punishment even more. The Byzantines inherited Roman law but added layers of Christian morality and Greek-style philosophy. They asked questions like, does punishment need to be so painful? Can we correct people instead of killing them? Is fear the only way to keep order? This was radical thinking for a society built on centuries of harsh discipline. Byzantine lawmakers introduced punishments that were less fatal, less theatrical, more symbolic, more focused on repentance. Instead of throwing someone to beasts, a Byzantine judge might order a fine, a public penance, a branding, a mild physical punishment, or exile. Still harsh, but nowhere near as dramatic as the old Roman ways. Even emperors who were strict didn't usually stage the kind of violent shows the old empire loved. The new attitude was, punish the crime, but don't entertain the crowd. The justice system was maturing, slowly, unevenly, but definitely moving away from the lion pit. Gradual decline of gladiatorial executions. One of the clearest signs of Rome's changing values was the end of gladiatorial executions. For hundreds of years, the arena was the heart of Roman entertainment. It was where the empire showed its strength, where crowds cheered, and where punishments became performance. But everything has an expiration date, even lions eating criminals. The decline happened in stages. Stage 1, growing discomfort. As Christianity spread, many people started to feel uncomfortable watching humans die for fun. Even non-Christians began to ask whether killing criminals publicly really made society better. Stage 2, legal restrictions. By the late 4th century, emperors passed laws limiting gladiator fights. Some banned them temporarily. Some banned specific types of shows. Stage 3, financial problems. Lions, panthers, bears, and stage props were expensive. The empire was getting poorer. Leaders asked themselves, do we really need to spend this much money on leopard snacks? Stage 4, final bans. Eventually, under Christian emperors, gladiatorial executions were outlawed entirely. Some small illegal fights continued, but the era of grand public spectacles was over. The Colosseum went from a roaring theater to a half-quiet ruin. Over time, it became a fortress, a workshop, a home for monks, and eventually, a monument to Rome's past. The sand dried. The crowds disappeared. The roar of animals faded. Rome had outgrown its old appetite. From spectacle to imprisonment and taxation. As dramatic punishments faded, Rome's justice system became more, well, boring. Instead of killing criminals creatively, the late empire focused on Imprisonment. Forced labor. Heavy taxation. Fines. Bureaucratic penalties. It wasn't kinder, exactly. It was just less visible. Prison became a more common tool, especially for political opponents. Forced labor. Working in mines or quarries replaced theatrical executions. Instead of scaring the public with violence, the government now drained criminals' economic worth. Taxation also became a kind of punishment. If someone angered the state, fines or sudden tax changes could ruin them quietly, without a public scene. Bureaucrats became the new lions. Late Rome discovered something powerful. You don't need a spectacle to control people. You just need paperwork. It wasn't glamorous, but it worked. How the empire's fall reshaped punitive culture. When the Western Roman Empire collapsed in the 5th century, it took the old punishment system with it. The new powers, Germanic kingdoms, the Catholic Church, and local warlords, created their own forms of justice. Some differences. Many Germanic laws focused on compensation rather than punishment. Fines replaced torture in many areas. Trials became more community-based. The Church promoted forgiveness and penance. Brutal public shows practically disappeared. Punishment became quieter, smaller, less ritualized, less theatrical. No more dressing criminals as mythological characters. No more lions waiting backstage. No more emperors using punishments as entertainment. The culture that once loved the roar of the arena now preferred calm order. The drama was gone. Rome's world had transformed. Final thoughts. The decline of Roman brutality wasn't a straight line. It was a long, messy process shaped by new religions, new political systems, and new economic realities. Christianity softened attitudes. Byzantine reforms changed laws. Gladiatorial shows faded into history. Prisons and taxes replaced fire and beasts. And after the empire fell, the dramatic violence of Rome became a memory rather than a reality. Rome didn't suddenly become gentle. But it did become different, less theatrical, less public, less obsessed with turning punishment into a show. The chapter closes with a simple idea. Empires change. Culture changes. Even a civilization built on power and spectacle eventually grows tired of blood and looks for a quieter way to keep order. As we reach the end of this journey through Rome's strangest punishments, it's worth taking a slow breath. Let the noise of the past settle, like dust drifting down in an empty arena. After all the dramatic stories, lions, emperors, rituals, angry mobs, bizarre costumes, it's time to sit quietly with the bigger meaning behind it all. Because Rome's punishments weren't only about cruelty. They weren't only about power. They were reflections, mirrors held up to the deepest parts of human nature. When we look at Rome, we are also looking at ourselves, just in more dramatic outfits. This is the chapter where we relax, think softly, and let the loud past grow calm around us. A calm reflection on past cruelty. It can feel strange to drift into sleep while hearing about crucifixion, decimation, humiliation, and emperors who woke up and chose chaos. But bedtime doesn't always need to be sweet stories and gentle flowers. Sometimes, looking at the darker parts of history helps the mind settle. It reminds us that humanity survived all of this, grew beyond it, and kept moving forward. Cruelty was once normal. It was part of daily life, part of law, part of entertainment. Romans didn't think they were monsters, they believed they were protecting their world, their gods, their families, their empire. Now, from a peaceful bed centuries later, we can look back with calm amazement and say, wow! They really did all that. A little humor helps make the weight lighter. But the truth remains, they lived in a world where fear was a tool, pain was a lesson, and punishment was a performance. Rome's punishments as a mirror of fear. At the heart of Rome's harshest penalties lived fear. Fear of rebellion. Fear of chaos. Fear of the gods turning their faces away. Fear of losing control of the empire. Fear that one person's mistake could poison the whole city. Fear shaped everything. Why slaves were punished so brutally. Why soldiers were treated with harsh discipline. Why emperors lashed out at the smallest insult. Why public executions crowded the arena. Why exile could erase your entire identity. Each punishment was a message to the people. Stay in line. The world is dangerous. Rome must stay strong. Fear made the empire powerful, but it also made it fragile. A society that depends on fear is always holding its breath. Rome's punishments as a mirror of power. Power was everywhere in Roman justice. It was in the raised thumb of an emperor. It was in the lash of a centurion. It was in the judge's decision to exile, fine, shame, or destroy someone's reputation. Punishment was Rome's favorite language of authority. For emperors, it became a stage. For generals, it became a tool. For families, it became protection. For citizens, it was a warning. Power told Rome who mattered. Power told Rome who didn't. Power told Rome who could be erased. When punishments are dramatic, it's usually because someone wants to show off their strength. And Rome loved to show off. Rome's punishments as a mirror of insecurity. It might sound strange, but behind all of Rome's confidence lived deep insecurity. Why else would they invent punishments involving sacks full of animals? Myth-themed executions. Book burnings. Forced suicides. Heavy public shaming rituals. Complex religious ceremonies before killing someone. These weren't the actions of a calm, stable society. They were the actions of a civilization always looking over its shoulder, worrying about enemies, gods, conspiracies, and the collapse of order. Even emperors, with all their luxury, lived in fear. Some couldn't sleep. Some trusted no one. Some saw betrayal in every shadow. Their punishments reflected that constant anxiety. Rome didn't punish because it was strong. Rome punished because it wanted to feel strong. Rome's punishments as a mirror of belief. Rome believed the world was full of unseen forces. Gods watching. Spirits wandering. Omens hiding in birds, clouds, lightning, and dreams. Crime wasn't just wrong. It was polluting. It shocked the universe. It offended the divine. So punishments became rituals, careful, symbolic performances meant to clean the stain and restore cosmic balance. Executions at dawn. Actions at crossroads. Purification ceremonies. Priests reading signs. Rome didn't punish to destroy. Rome punished to heal, at least in its own mind. Their justice system was a spiritual storybook, full of drama, symbolism, fear, and hope. The lesson: civilizations thrive when justice comes from compassion, not terror. Looking back now, we can say this gently. Fear keeps people silent, but compassion keeps people loyal. Terror creates obedience, but kindness builds trust. Cruel justice lasts a moment, but fair justice lasts generations. Rome lasted a long time, but its harshest punishments didn't make it eternal. In the end, the empire changed because people wanted something softer, something kinder, something more human. Modern justice systems still struggle. No society is perfect, but many have learned from Rome's mistakes. We know now that punishment without compassion becomes cruelty. And cruelty becomes a burden on everyone. History teaches us slowly, but it does teach. A gentle ending for the listener. Now, as the chapter closes, imagine the ancient world fading into dusk. The crowds leave the arena. The torches dim. The stones grow quiet. take a soft breath. Let your mind drift. Tonight, the roar of the arena fades. No lions. No shouting. No violent rituals. Just silence settling where chaos once lived. The torches burn low. The flames that once lit cruel punishments now glow faintly, gentle instead of fierce. And the ancient punishments, once instruments of fear, become distant echoes in the quiet of history. They lose their power. They lose their sharpness. They become stories, nothing more. The world has moved on. You can rest now, knowing you are far from Rome's harshness, far from its storms, safe in a calmer age. Let the past drift away like smoke disappearing into the night. The empire sleeps. The punishments sleep. And soon, you will, too.